Journalist Antony Loewenstein. He is the author of The Palestine Laboratory, How Israel Exports the Technology and Occupation Around the World. Anthony, thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
A week ago when Smotrich announced the go-ahead for E1, he was pretty straightforward, didn't hide the truth, and that is that this is a plan to divide the West Bank and make a future Palestinian state just not work. Now he wants the Israeli Prime Minister to annex all of the West Bank. Here he is.
On this important day, I call from here on Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. The time has come to fully apply Israeli sovereignty over Judea and Samaria, to forever remove from the table the idea of dividing the land, and to make sure that by September, Europe's hypocrite leaders will simply have nothing to recognize.
The Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon, who's the father of the settlement, said once, talk less, do more. Obviously, talk less is no longer a principle there because Israel seems no longer concerned about what the world thinks, no longer concerned about upholding previous agreements entered into by past governments like the Oslo Accords.
But I tell you what they do care about is their international reputation. Now, it might not seem that way, but if you look at public opinion polls in the US, Europe, the UK, Australia, what you find is, particularly in the last 6 months, this is a recent Pew poll, that a majority of citizens, the public, fundamentally oppose what Israel is doing in the West Bank and certainly in Gaza. They oppose Netanyahu. So there is a minority, evangelicals, very hardline, far-right Jews, and I'm Jewish myself, but I certainly don't subscribe to those views, who do support Netanyahu, who do support what Israel is doing. But Israel has always craved legitimacy, and they can occupy all of West Bank and destroy Gaza, but ultimately they don't get that legitimacy. And they actually crave that because this year Israel is spending $150 million US more to try to do better PR, essentially. Not to change the policies on the ground, but to actually try to change public perception. And frankly, it's not working.
Yeah, I wonder about that, the craving for, international legitimacy. A country that was born of the UN is highly critical of the UN. That does seem to have changed those to some degree, especially with this far-right element within Netanyahu's coalition. They don't seem to be as sort of concerned about it as much as it has been in the past.
That's true to an extent. I mean, at the moment, Netanyahu feels like he has the wind in his sails. Trump is on board. I mean, the American ambassador just this week to Israel, Mike Huckabee, said essentially that Israel can do what it wants in the West Bank. But ultimately, look, the West Bank has been annexed unofficially for years. I've spent a lot of time over there. I used to be based in Jerusalem. Anyone who spends 5 minutes across the West Bank, let alone Gaza, will tell you that settler violence, aided by Israeli soldiers, has been causing chaos across the West Bank for years. Palestinians cannot build their own homes. They can't expand their own homes. So ultimately, when the US and other countries talk about some kind of shift in public opinion, what in fact they're recognizing, I would argue, and this was the case long before Trump with Biden and others, that the reality on the ground speaks for itself. You mentioned before Ariel Sharon. Sharon was well aware that facts on the ground are what matter. So when Smotrich now is backing Netanyahu, it's important to say that just finally on this point, this is not simply an extremist far-right Israeli government. What they are doing now is supported by a sizable proportion of the Israeli Jewish population. That's the sad reality. So if and when Netanyahu falls as leader, which he will eventually, the likely successors on these issues are no different. This is what people need to understand. This is not just about Netanyahu and his coalition.
Here's part of a statement from the UK government opposing this new settlement. If implemented, it would divide a Palestinian state in two, mark a flagrant breach of international law, critically undermine the two-state solution. The Israeli government must reverse this decision. My experience is words of condemnation from another country have never forced Israel to reverse anything. And even recognizing a Palestinian state at the UN General Assembly is sort of a symbolic gesture, which is ultimately pointless. So what will, apart from this, the global public opinion, but what can individual governments do? What action can they take that will have an impact on what Israel does?
Well, a lot. I mean, as you say, the UK, France, Australia, Canada have pledged to recognise a Palestinian state next month, which is frankly token at best. All these countries, most of Europe, much of the Arab world, since October 7 and Israel's genocide in Gaza, none of them have stopped trading with Israel. Many of these countries are still sending weapons parts through the US and Lockheed Martin to produce the F-35 fighter jet that Israel is using over Gaza. There is a choice that European states and others are making to continue that trade. In fact, many of these states are trying to increase trade. The recent, I did a lot of work around the Palestine laboratory, around the arms and surveillance industries, and the recent 2024 figures found very clearly that Europe last year was the biggest purchaser of Israeli weapons, the biggest purchaser. So all the rhetoric about they're deeply concerned about the Palestinian Authority and the Palestinian state and apartheid in the West Bank, words are cheap. Economic pressure can make a difference. And I think a lot of European states and Arab states need to recognize that rather than continuing this phase of rhetoric, but actions on the ground speak for themselves.
There is a choice. It's a very good point to make. Antony, thanks for being with us. Really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me.